Look at me. I'm the captain now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 57 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about crocheting. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you for joining me on this episode today. Hopefully, you're all still staying inside and still staying safe. There's all kinds of things out there, and it's not just the coronavirus. There are bears out there, and there are drunk drivers, and there are Karens. There's all kinds of things out there that are dangerous. So why wouldn't you just stay inside and enjoy listening to me talk about movies here today? Actually, today I am not talking about movies, but rather I'm talking about the people who make the movies. Especially after just completing my ultimate movie watch list where I talked about 100 different movies that people can go watch and recommend. I wanted to instead talk about the directors of films. And before I get into my directors who I have chosen, who are my top 5 favorite directors, what is a director? For anyone who doesn't know, basically, it's right in the word. They direct the production. They're in charge of the creative aspect of making the film. All final decisions go through them. Now, it's not just the director who makes the entire movie. Obviously, it's thousands of people come together in order to make a film, but it's the director who has the clear vision of what the movie is supposed to be and guides the ship. Now, technically, the director does answer to the producer, and the producer is like the main person in charge. The producer is the person who pays for everything, and they work on production schedules, and they work on hiring the whole team and just making sure that they have a smooth sailing throughout production. Some very famous producers, Kevin Feige, who's the producer, and basically the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe was his brainchild. He's a very good producer, especially from a financial and creative aspect. Like, he knows the properties very well that he's helping create and hiring the right directors to make sure that those projects get made. Kathleen Kennedy is another very well-known producer. She was a producer on the Indiana Jones films. She's currently the head of Lucasfilm, and whether you are a fan of what she's doing with Lucasfilm or not, there's no denying that the movies that she produces are very popular and make lots and lots of money. But getting back to the topic of directors and producers and their relationships, there are a lot of times where the producer will just give the director free rein, saying like, this is your project, just do it within budget, and they will go nuts and make their own stuff. Now, having that kind of freedom is very, very rare, but for the most part, directors get to do their jobs. There are a lot of crazy stories out there about studio interference, I guess is the way that people like to describe it, and basically what happens is they're making a movie and then the producer steps in and says, like, hey, I don't like what you're doing, you need to make all of these changes. And then that causes problems, and then directors get fired off of the set. Kathleen Kennedy is actually a good example of this with a few of the Star Wars movies where Solo, A Star Wars Story was like 2 weeks away from being done filming, and then Kathleen Kennedy walks in and says like, hey, we don't like what you're doing with our movie, you need to make all these changes. And the Lord and Miller, who are the directors of Solo, didn't really like that, and they didn't want to play ball, so they were given the boot, and Ron Howard was brought in to fix the movie. And I like Solo, A Star Wars Story, but I feel like it just feels incomplete, and it feels cobbled together, which is a problem, right? Like, you don't want movies to feel that way. They need to be a cohesive story. And so when things like that happen, it's just to the detriment of the quality of the film. Another good example of this happening is I can't remember what year it came out, but the newest Fantastic Four movie, the one with Miles Teller, Fant Four Stick is a popular title that people refer to it as. But Josh Trank, the director, was like doing his own thing, and studio came in and were like, make all these changes, and that movie's horrible. It is quite the abomination of a film. Like, I have seen it once. I saw it when it first came out, and I was like, nope, I can't watch this a second time. Maybe down the road, like, give me another 5 or 10 years, maybe I could watch that movie again. But it was just so bad. It was all over the place. So, but I'm not here to complain about producers and directors. I'm here to talk about my favorite directors. So I've got my top 5 favorite directors, and I have 2 honorable mentions that I'll talk about first before I get into my top 5. My first honorable mention is a very famous and well-known director. He goes by the name of Christopher Nolan. Now, Christopher Nolan's movies are just top quality. Like, this is a experienced filmmaker who knows how to tell a story, and he would have been in my top 5 if it weren't for a couple of his movies that I really dislike, those two being The Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar. I know a lot of people really like these movies, and it's kind of an unpopular opinion to hate on Interstellar, but I just think that movie makes no sense at all. And don't tell me that it's just because I don't understand the science. I do understand the science. I'm a smart individual. What I don't understand is all of the plot holes because of said science, or at the end of the movie, it's not all of the science that we've been focused on for the entire film. It's, oh, love saves the universe. And that, it's just such a weird left turn. I think it's very weak storytelling. So I do not enjoy Interstellar at all. Visually, the movie is spectacular, but that's all I have to say positive about Interstellar. Otherwise, I don't like the movie at all. And The Dark Knight Rises, I feel really was trying really hard to top The Dark Knight, which The Dark Knight is an excellent film, but it's not even my favorite of Christopher Nolan's movies. I would have to say my favorite of his movies are probably Inception, The Prestige, and Dunkirk. Probably is what I would say are my favorites. But going back to The Dark Knight Rises, not The Dark Knight, it felt like he was just really trying to top it and make it bigger and make it better, and it just felt all over the place, and maybe felt like maybe he didn't even want to make that movie. Maybe with the death of Heath Ledger, like the plan that he had for the third Batman movie was not what he wanted. Like he had to change things because Heath Ledger died, right? So maybe that's what happened. I don't know for sure. I don't have any confirmation on that. But needless to say, Christopher Nolan is a very talented director, and I like his movies a lot. His next movie coming out this year, Tenet, I'm very excited about. It has not changed its release date despite COVID and everything that's happening. So I'm really hoping that it makes its way into theaters and that I get to see it on the biggest screen possible in 70mm film if I have the opportunity. But we'll see. I did get to see Dunkirk in that format. So here's hoping, right? Wanting to check out Tenet. I'm very excited. My other honorable mention is a Canadian director, and I'm Canadian, so that's great. He goes by the name of Denis Villeneuve, and he is the director of Sicario and Prisoners and Arrival and Blade Runner 2049. And you all know how much I love Blade Runner 2049. I think it's just a masterpiece of filmmaking. This is another guy who just visually and from a story point of view, his movies are just excellent. His next movie, Dune, which is coming out soon, I'm so excited for. I cannot wait until it hits theaters. It's scheduled to come out in December, and it's also going to be 2 movies now as opposed to just 1. That's something I am just hugely excited for. I can't wait. I actually thought that we were going to get a trailer right away because they released a bunch of promotional images for the movie recently. It was either last week or the week before. Was it last week or the week before? I don't know. Time has all just started to blend for me at this point, just staying home all the time. A really good example is that I have no concept of what day of the week it is anymore. And yesterday I was actually supposed to record today's podcast episode, but because I didn't know what day of the week it was, instead of recording my podcast, I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood instead. So that's just me not knowing what day it is, and then trying to scramble to get everything done. But in any case, Dune, I'm very excited for. Cannot wait for it to come out. And Denis Villeneuve is a really talented director. If you haven't seen his films, I would recommend checking them out. So Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve are my 2 honorable mentions of favorite directors. And now why don't I get into my top 5? We'll start with number 5. And speaking of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, number 5 is Quentin Tarantino. Whether you like Tarantino or not, I feel like there's no denying that his movies are not only entertaining, but they spark conversation. And you can have conversations about some of the controversial topics that he brings up and puts into his movies. And he's very in your face about these controversial things. Like, he lets you see the world the way he sees it, and whether you agree with how he sees everything or not, He has such a unique voice. Like I really enjoy watching Quentin Tarantino interviews, and while I don't agree with everything that he has to say, I am just endlessly entertained by watching this guy talk and the way he thinks and the way he acts. Like he does what he wants, and no one is going to tell him differently. Now, sometimes I feel like that makes him look like a bit of a jerk, but it's still entertaining to watch. One of my favorites is when he was doing promotions for Kill Bill. When Kill Bill was coming out, he had an interview with a woman from a news network who was kind of berating him for how he said that children can go watch Kill Bill. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's up to you. But he just like took this woman down and was just like yelling at her and telling her that movies are not real and anyone can watch any movie because what you watch in a movie and what's real life are completely different and completely separated and in no way related at all, which is a very interesting point of view. I don't think it's right. I think that people are hugely influenced by the things that they watch and listen to. So hopefully you're not negatively influenced by listening to me. I definitely don't want anything like that. But going back to that interview, she talks about why he feels the need to have all of this violence in his movies, and he just looks at her and goes, "Because it's so much fun, Jan." And it's just one of my favorite clips of Quentin Tarantino. It's very funny. But for each of my 5 directors, I picked 3 of my favorite movies of theirs. So for Quentin Tarantino, my favorite movies are The Hateful Eight, Inglourious Basterds, and Reservoir Dogs. Now, The Hateful Eight and Inglourious Basterds I actually rewatched recently. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but part of our isolation, one thing that me and my wife and my sister are doing is that we each have a day of the week, and on that day of the week, you get to pick whatever movie you want, and the other 2 people have to watch it no matter what. Doesn't matter if you feel like it or if you don't. That is your movie pick day. So Saturday is my movie pick day, and for my first 2 picks, I chose Inglourious Basterds and The Hateful Eight. And for days afterwards, we were still talking about those movies and like discussing what happens and just everything that goes on in those films because it's worth talking about. And I think that's what really draws me to Quentin Tarantino is that there's conversation to be had about his movies, whether you agree or whether you disagree, or whether his movies make you uncomfortable, or whether you find them hilarious and endlessly entertaining. And I fall somewhere in between there. But every time he releases a new movie, I find myself looking forward to it and I go check it out. And like I said yesterday, I rewatched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's my second time watching it. And I came to the realization that I don't so much as really like that movie as much as I really like parts of it. Like all of this stuff with Margot Robbie's character and Roman Polanski almost have nothing to do with the rest of the movie unless you're really invested in what happened with the Manson family murders in the late 60s in Hollywood. And because that's something I'm not as invested in and like that happened so many years ago, I don't care about it too much. Like and that's awful of me to say because a pregnant woman was murdered and I feel like that's just like a horrible thing. But the way Tarantino changes history in his movies and makes things his own, it opens up that door for conversation. And so with all of those things together, I think that's what makes Tarantino one of my favorite directors because you can always have a conversation about what he puts on screen. That'll be it for Tarantino, though. I'm going to move on to my number 4. Now, my number 4 favorite director would probably be higher on the list, but he only has 3 feature films under his belt, and because of that, he only sits at number 4, and his name is Damien Chazelle. Now, I love all 3 of his movies. They are so fantastic. I actually do think I like them in order of like best to worst, in the order that they came out. So his most recent movie, First Man, I really liked it. I thought Ryan Gosling gave a wonderful performance as Neil Armstrong. And then La La Land, love La La Land. And then his number 1 movie, which I think is just wonderful, is Whiplash. Now, what's interesting about Damien Chazelle is that he either really, really loves jazz or really, really hates it. And I go back and forth. Either way, I have no idea. Because in his first 2 movies, Whiplash and La La Land, they're about jazz performers like doing their thing and wanting to be the best. and it talks about like how demanding the art form is and how much you have to sacrifice and give into it. And I think that either means that he's like hating on jazz because of how much it costs to be a part of that area of society or whatever, or he really loves it and says like, look at all of the work I'm willing to put into this because I made like 2 whole movies about jazz. And then in First Man, there's no jazz. It's just about Neil Armstrong going to the moon. And that movie's visuals are really, really great. The performances are great. It's such a strong film. I'm really disappointed it wasn't nominated for Best Picture the year it came out, which was 2018, I want to say. It was 2018 or 2019. It was one of the two. I think it was 2018 actually. Yeah, I'm sticking with 2018. But it was just a really good movie watching experience, and I feel it was a caliber of film that deserved to be nominated, and it didn't, and so I was a little disappointed by that. But like I've said before, I don't really put a lot of stock into the Oscars anymore, which is a shame, but that's a whole different topic. But Damien Chazelle, as a director, he's also really young. He's in his early 30s. Now, this is like unheard of for some young directors. There are not too many really young directors working right now. Ryan Coogler is another one. I think he's also in his early 30s, and if you're not familiar with Ryan Coogler, he directed Black Panther and Creed. He did not do Creed 2. He also did a movie called Fruitvale Station, and I think another one. I think he has 4 movies under his belt. But Damien Chazelle, he's just this young kid who wants to make movies, and he's out there doing it, and he's doing a great job. Whiplash is a movie that just has you on the edge of your seat the whole time, and J.K. Simmons' performance is Oscar-winning. You go into La La Land, and that is just a whole different kind of emotional ride. And Emma Stone won the Academy Award for her performance in that movie, and he also won for Best Achievement in Directing for La La Land. And then you go into First Man, which didn't get as much Oscar love, and I feel like maybe it didn't because it's a political thing. They're like, oh, like, this kid is like making great movies, but we can't always choose him. Like, maybe it's like that. Who knows? I don't know. But Damien Chazelle is a fantastic choice, and I love his movies. They're the ones, like, I can't always sit down and watch them because they're so filled with emotion, and I find myself so heavily invested in what he has to put on screen that I can't just watch it whenever I want, because I need to be able to be in the right mindset to know that, okay, I'm about to watch something that's heavy, something that is emotional, something that is just going to draw me in, and I need to be prepared for that. So Damien Chazelle is my 4th favorite director. Now we're on to number 3, almost half done the list, or are half done. I don't know how you want to judge it, but number 3 on my list is an older director. His name is Alfred Hitchcock. Now, Alfred Hitchcock is best known as the master of suspense. His movies are very suspenseful. They're usually about killers or murderers in some respect, and like a whodunit or what's going to happen, edge of your seat type movies. I really like every Hitchcock movie I have seen. There's 1 or 2 where I'm not as okay with, but like North by Northwest is fantastic. I think The Birds is maybe one that I don't like as much. Like, it's still good and still entertaining, but compared to his other films that I've seen, it's not quite on that level. So my top 3 favorite movies of his is a movie called Rope, Psycho, obviously, and Rear Window. Pretty sure I've talked about all 3 of these movies before, just his use of music and camera movement. He also cameos himself in his movies, so he sticks himself in, and you can like, oh, where's Alfred Hitchcock? Where's he gonna pop up? And I really like that. I don't know if he appears in Rope though, because it all takes place in an apartment building. I think you see him at the very beginning at a shot of the street, and I think the same for Rear Window. And Psycho, he's also at the beginning of the movie, because Psycho is one of his later films. Rear Window came out in 1954, and Rope was 46, I think. I can't remember what year Rope came out, but Psycho came out in 1960, and by this point, he was a very famous director, and people knew that he stuck himself into his movies, so they're always like on the lookout. It's kind of like Stan Lee. And everyone's like, oh, when's Stan Lee going to pop up in the movie? So for this movie, Psycho is the one I'm talking about. So for Psycho, his cameo is at the very beginning of the movie, like right at in the front, because he didn't want people to be looking for him throughout the movie. They wanted to be focused on the movie itself, and Psycho is a masterpiece. It's like it is predictable at this point, but in 1960 when it came out, people did not know what was going to happen in that movie, and I'm going to get into light spoilers here, but the main character, or who everyone thought was the main character, she was played by, oh, what's her name? Janet Leigh? Is that right? And she was very famous at the time, big name, one of the highest paid actresses at the time, and Alfred Hitchcock like killed her off near the beginning of the film, and she was like on all of the posters, and then like the real main character is revealed, and like this character was not on the posters and wasn't like promoted at all. Like you knew that this person was in the movie, but you did not know that they were going to be like the main draw of the film. And I think both of these performers gave really excellent performances. There's a scene when they're both sitting in a room and just talking, and it's probably my favorite scene of the whole movie. It's just like edge of your seat, like it is tense during this scene. And I'm not wanting to get into spoilers at all, even though it is a movie that came out in 1960, but I think like when a movie's been out for a few months, I think that it's fine to talk about spoilers and not really care. But I think when a movie's been out for decades, you get to a point where people definitely probably haven't seen it unless they're really invested in movies, like someone like myself who will go back through and see all the really big movies that came out back in the day. And that's part of the reason why I made that ultimate movie list, is so that people would be exposed to some older films. I'm really tripping over my words here. Maybe it was that cup of coffee I had right before I sat down to record. I'm feeling it more than I usually do. When I drink coffee, I don't feel it usually, but I think today is maybe making me a little bit jittery, or maybe it's just because I've been inside for so long. Maybe I need to go outside, go for a walk after this. It looks pretty nice out right now. It's a little bit windy. It's been really windy, actually, a lot for the last little while. All of this, of course, is not important, though. Going back to Psycho, I don't want to spoil it because I feel like a lot of people have not seen it, or like even if you have seen it and know, I still don't want to wreck it. Psycho is a great movie and you should watch it. Also, Rear Window is a great movie and you should watch it. Rope is wonderful. North by Northwest, Vertigo, The Birds, all fantastic movies, and I highly, highly, highly recommend them. Like it's just he's a great director. He's one of the all-time best, and that's why he's number 3 on my list. So Alfred Hitchcock is number 3. We'll move on to number 2, another older director. He goes by the name of Billy Wilder. He's just so good. You've probably heard me talk about him on the podcast before, because I love every single one of his movies that I've seen. I have not seen all of them. I should correct that. But all of them, they're just so good. And the 3 that I have written down here are Sunset Boulevard, The Apartment, and Some Like It Hot. Some Like It Hot is my favorite comedy of all time. It is so cleverly written and so well put together. It's got Jack Lemmon, it's got Marilyn Monroe, and the other guy, Tony Curtis. A wonderful cast, wonderful script, really well put together. It's just a hilarious movie. So Some Like It Hot is just like, I have nothing but good things to say about that movie. The Apartment won Best Picture in 1960, also has Jack Lemmon, has Shirley MacLaine, and like that movie is fantastic. Like, and then going to Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard is my second favorite movie of all time. It's so good and so dramatic, and like once again, so well written. I think Billy Wilder wrote most of his screenplays that he directed, or at least teamed up with someone to write them. He is such a strong writer, and these are just 3 of his movies. Last week we watched, for my movie pick, I picked Double Indemnity, which is one of his films. It came out in 1944. That movie is 76 years old. 76 years old. And even 76 years later, I'm watching it and I'm enthralled by it. And my wife and my sister, who watched it for the first time, they were enthralled by it. And even though the movie at the beginning kind of tells you how it's going to end, you're still on the edge of your seat of like, what is going to happen? Double Indemnity is a really strong film. I recommend it for sure. If you like film noir is kind of like a detective, mystery, murder, femme fatale. Like there's a lot of different things that can fit within film noir, but I think Double Indemnity is one of those movies that are just top notch of the genre. Sunset Boulevard can also be considered film noir. It's not quite, but it is on that level, and I love Sunset Boulevard. I think the way it's shot, this movie is in black and white at a time where color was really, really popular still. Well, no. Sunset Boulevard came out in 1950. There was still a lot of black and white at the time. I'm thinking of Psycho, which came out in 1960 and was in black and white. But I think that if Sunset Boulevard were in color as opposed to black and white, the movie would not have the same feel. It wouldn't feel as dramatic. It wouldn't have that film noir sense to it. And I don't think the movie would be as strong just by one simple thing of being in color versus in black and white. I think one day I want to have an episode where I sit down and just dissect Sunset Boulevard and do a full spoiler, complete deep dive into this classic film. Oh my goodness, I love this movie so much. And it's one of those ones that even though it's heavy, I'm always down to watch it. And that seems like a contradiction to what I said earlier about Damien Chazelle's movies, where I need to be mentally prepared going into it because I know it's so heavy. And this is a movie that even though I know it's heavy, I am still enthralled and entertained and wanting to go back and watch this movie again and notice more things that I haven't noticed about it and dive even deeper into this story. And what's great about Sunset Boulevard is that the script wasn't even completed when they started filming. He hadn't figured out the ending yet. He was still writing it. So the actors only had part of a script that they were performing and acting in, and that just blows my mind that they didn't even know where their characters were going. They just knew who their characters were at that moment in the script, and with that knowledge had to go for it. And I know that there are a lot of processes that a lot of different actors have to go through to get into character, and part of that is knowing who your character is throughout the entire journey of the film, and knowing where your character ends up can greatly influence your performance for a character in an earlier scene in the film. That can lead to either foreshadowing or like stronger enforce certain themes that come up later in the film. So I think that having that knowledge, knowing that the script wasn't even done when those earlier scenes were shot, that just blows my mind and makes me respect the film even more. So Billy Wilder, you are a fantastic director, and if you have not watched any of his movies, I recommend at least these three: Sunset Boulevard, The Apartment, and Some Like It Hot. But that's going to be enough about him. I have one more director left. Just off the top of my head, some other honorable mentions that I maybe should have written down. I love the work of Peter Jackson. Obviously, Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies ever. George Lucas, he's great. Love the stuff that he does for the most part. Pete Docter is a really good director as well. He directed Inside Out and a few other Pixar movies. So like there are just so many great directors out there, and I know that not everyone is as into tracking directors' careers and like really being invested in a director as opposed to an actor. Like my dad will watch any movie that has Tom Cruise in it. And more recently, he'll watch anything that has Jason Momoa in it because he likes like leading stars, like tough guy men. And even though Tom Cruise doesn't even really seem like a tough guy man, back in the 80s when he was in Top Gun, that's what he was, and now in Mission Impossible, he's that as well. But I think that for me, I am way more attracted as to who's directing a movie as to who's starring in a movie. And I think a lot of that has to do with my obsession with the filmmaking process itself and how everything comes together, and the job and the responsibility of a director to guide the story and make sure that everything is as great as it possibly can be. That I think that's part of why I'm so into directors and I love what they have to do, especially this last director. Number one, well, I'll just get right into it. It's Steven Spielberg. There's no denying he's probably the best of all time. And what's different about Steven Spielberg from some of these other directors is Tarantino makes Quentin Tarantino movies. Damien Chazelle makes Damien Chazelle movies. Like, his movies have similar feels. Alfred Hitchcock, they're all very suspenseful. They're all edge of your seat. They're all about murder in some way. Steven Spielberg has made major films across multiple different genres. Let's take a look. Jaws. Jaws is one of the very first blockbusters when like people were wrapped around the block in lineups. That's why it's called a blockbuster, if you didn't know. So Jaws was one of the first blockbusters. Indiana Jones defined the adventure genre. E.T. is a science fiction movie. The Color Purple is a very heavy drama. Lincoln is a biopic about Abraham Lincoln. Saving Private Ryan is a World War II movie. Jurassic Park is a science fiction movie about dinosaurs. Minority Report is another one. Schindler's List is a Best Picture winner. Like, there are so many different genres that Steven Spielberg has been able to play in. Ready Player One is another great movie of his that I enjoy a lot. I wrote down my top 3 favorite movies of his, though it took a lot of thinking and debating. But I think my favorites of his are Saving Private Ryan, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Jurassic Park. These are all really strong films. He has a lot of other really strong films. Some of his are not as good. I will admit that not all of his movies are amazing. I did not love the BFG, and AI, Artificial Intelligence, I don't think is as good either. But these 3 movies, Jurassic Park, Last Crusade, and Saving Private Ryan, are so good. Especially that opening battle scene, like storming the beach and Saving Private Ryan. It's so intense. And the horrors of war. This movie came out in 1997. A lot of people, myself included, feel it should have won Best Picture the year it came out. It lost to Shakespeare in Love, which is an absolute crime. This movie is way better. Have you ever seen Shakespeare in Love? No? Have you ever heard of Shakespeare in Love? No? Oh, have you ever heard of Saving Private Ryan? Probably, because it's way better. It stood the test of time. It's absolute nonsense that Saving Private Ryan did not win. It's such a good movie. Really strong. All the performances are really great. It's got Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is at the top of his game in the 90s. Look at Philadelphia. Look at Forrest Gump. Look at Sleepless in Seattle. What's the other one? You've Got Mail. All those movies came out in the 90s, baby. And they've all got Tom Hanks. And they're all great. But going back to Steven Spielberg as the topic for what I'm talking about, just his career and all the people that he's worked with, and it's basically because of him that George Lucas has a career, and they're really good friends, and him and James Cameron have formed a bond, and they're friends on some level, and he just keeps making movies that are really just excellent films. And his most recent one, I do believe, was Ready Player One. I loved that movie. Also love the book, by the way. Just a name drop. Read the book, watch the movie. They're both wonderful for their own different reasons, even though they're super different. But Steven Spielberg as a director, he just really understands. He just knows what it means to sit in a theater and just become enveloped in a story. Be sucked in to something. Whether that's a movie about the horrors of war, or about Nazi Germany, or about a man with a whip trying to find the Holy Grail, or dinosaurs on an island. And he just understands that just the magic of movies and the magic of filmmaking. And you can be riding on a horse next to Indiana Jones, or you can be sitting in a room with Abraham Lincoln. Steven Spielberg just gets it. He knows how to make you feel suspenseful. He knows how to make you feel excited. He knows how to make you feel emotional. E.T. is such an emotional film about a little boy who meets an alien. And I think that's a real strength of Steven Spielberg, is he can get magnificent performances out of kids. He gets that childlike wonder. And I think that's part of why Jurassic Park is such a strong movie. I think that's part of why Indiana Jones is amazing. why Jaws is so exciting, because Steven Spielberg remembers being a kid sitting in a theater, and he remembers those feelings of excitement. He remembers the feelings of drama, and it's all of those things wrapped into one wonderful package that makes me just respect Steven Spielberg as a filmmaker, makes me respect him as a person. I would love to have the opportunity to meet this man. He just gets it. And that's all I have to say, is that Steven Spielberg is my favorite director of all time. He is probably the best director of all time. And that's just it. He's number one. He's the best. He's my favorite. He's Steven Spielberg, number one, my favorite director. That's it for this whole list. Why don't I run them through one more time? We've got Quentin Tarantino, Damien Chazelle, Alfred Hitchcock, Billy Wilder, and then, of course, Steven Spielberg. So my question for you guys listening is, who is your favorite director? I would love to know. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter at PottleNathan, and you can find the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and if you haven't done so and you like the show, you can feel free to subscribe to it. You can do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places. I've got those links in the description below. You can find it there. I hope that you guys continue to stay inside. Hope that you continue to stay safe. Hopefully it's not too much longer before we're able to get back into movie theaters and sit down and watch movies again. I, for one, hope that we get to do that soon. I've been missing the movie theater experience probably more than anything else in this entire isolation thing. So hopefully it's not too much longer before we can do that again. And remember, if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.